Hello and welcome to yet another session of In Dialogue Foundation's Certificate Course in Dialogue Studies 2024-2025. Today, we have the pleasure of having with us Dr. Krishna Swamy Dara, who would be speaking on modernity, postmodernity, and dialogue. Dr. Krishna Swamy Dara is a political scientist and currently an assistant professor in the Department of Political Science at Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi. In 2007, he received his doctorate from the Department of Political Science at Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. The thesis titled The Idea of Minority in Ambedkar's Thought, Equality and Differential Rights was supervised by Professor Valerian Rodrigues and was awarded the Best PhD for 2007 by Nirman Foundation, India. Dr. Dara, you have up to 2 hours for the session. You may leave as much time for questions and discussions as you like. And as usual, I remind all the participants to keep their cameras on during the session. Sir, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Pragya, and also thanks to Bezad and the India Dialogue Foundation for inviting me to give this lecture on modernity, postmodernity, and dialogue. I found the title very interesting and challenging, and and I thought a bit, and then I thought, let me. So broadly, I'll introduce you to modernity first, or what I think modernity is. Then what is postmodernity? We deal with this issue, and then we would go into, since the concern is with dialogue, we're going to discuss Habermas, and then the critiques of Habermas from the postmodern point of view. And most of you have already, I think, part of the discussion and debate on dialogue. And I'm not sure whether others have discussed these two thinkers that I'm going to handle, Habermas and Francois Lyotard. And then I will try to conclude. I hope within the next 1 hour, mostly I'll be spending 1 hour or 1 hour, 20 minutes on my basic presentation, and then we can spend the rest of the time for discussion and to deal with that. Let me begin with what modernity is and how I understand what modernity is. Like anything in social sciences and political science, we know that no term has a fixed meaning, and its meaning is constantly changing, and it is always has to be understood within broader context in which the word gets invoked and it gets used. And whenever I'm using the word modernity or postmodernity or generally, I'm using the term in the broadest sense possible, because within one idea of modernity, there are many other ideas impregnated within that idea, and one cannot actually completely delineate or every particular strand within what has been termed, labeled as modernity. Modernity is a broad rubric in which a lot of things are generally discussed and spoken within the academia. And for a long period of time, this word modernity and postmodernity was not part of our day-to-day life, but soon these terms are becoming part of our day-to-day political discourse and becoming part of our lives. So therefore, I do not want to assume that the students here or the members here who are here are completely ignorant of it. Neither I want to assume that they know everything about it. So I'll take a very balanced approach about it. Maybe for some it might look as if I'm saying the same thing. The benefit of those who are not aware of it, I'm just going to repeat the main features of what modernity is, and then later on we'll come to the question of what dialogue, the thing that for the reason for which you are here. in between. So if there is anything, something that I'm saying is not clear to you, or something which you want me to talk a bit more, you can raise your hand and ask me to explain, because not everything is you know clearly chatted out in my head. So and then I will explain it, and then in the end we'll again still go to the question and answer session. Of course, I would like to make it as less boring as possible. I know it's your. I don't want to spoil your evening by giving you a boring lecture. And I don't know how many lectures you have already heard today. As a teacher, I know that it takes a toll on students to listen to at least long lectures. So, modernity generally is characterized as a historical period, um, generally beginning with the Renaissance period within Europe, and later followed by Enlightenment, and particularly it gets robustly developed within the 19th century. And we are all from that point of view modern in that sense. We are all experienced. We are all consciously or unconsciously part of this movement called what they call modernity. Um, there is some technical distinction between modernization, modernity, and modernism. Modernism is generally used in art and architecture. It's a kind of a movement that happens within this, and modernization is when some new technological or some new innovations are made within a particular practice. Then we generally call it modernization. Even if you go to the Greeks, the word they use the word not the English word, but something what they call we the modern. So modern is a in that sense, people are always refer to themselves as modern compared to the past. We are not referring to the modernity of that modern in that sense, in the sense of a group trying to characterize themselves as modern compared to, but modernity has been recognized as a period which is mostly which has been inaugurated by what has been called the Enlightenment and its philosophies. Um, um, Most of you must be knowing the famous period of Renaissance, and the period it calls Renaissance because it tries to bring back the Greek values and Greek aesthetics and everything back into European society, thanks to uh, certain excavations. The sculptures of Greek sculptures started to come out, and Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, and all these main classical painters are influenced by the Greek culture, and then also the Europeans are also learning from the Muslim philosophers and intellectuals the the Greek philosophy, and they're translating back the works of Aristotle, Plato, that was preserved by the Arabic philosophers for a long period of time. Generally, what is called modernization, we can broadly categorize them as 4 or 5 features. Broadly, one is the emphasis on rationality. There has been a debate. There has been historically a debate between revelation versus reason, and generally, God or the Almighty or the one who is supreme reveals himself, itself, or herself, or themselves, whatever it is, to mankind through some form, and that is generally the deity or the God or the Almighty picks up certain individuals, generally called prophets or sages or someone through which God communicates to mankind, and so and so, and therefore revelation was generally preferred over reason. Much before the modernity emerges, there is a big debate between Saint Augustine and Aquinas about the importance of about the tension between reason and faith. And Saint Augustine very famously says that if you are wanting to seek spirituality or God, particularly, you have to prioritize faith versus reason, and reason was to be subservient to faith rather than faith being subservient to this. And in the works of Aquinas, where both reason and faith are supposed to work together, so these two were seen as sometimes contradictory and sometimes as complementary before. But with the coming of enlightenment, particularly the importance of reason becomes very, very. Reason gains a lot of importance in the socio-political life of Europe. A brief, what reason is? Reason is again a term that again can be defined and debated about what reason is, what constitutes reason. Is there something called reason, or is it still a construct? That again, there are a lot of debates within the academy about it. But by and large, reason is a faculty within the human mode of thinking, which can enable human beings to differentiate between right from wrong thinking. So reason, in a sense, is normative. Normative, in the sense, I'm using the word normative in the sense that it has an ought dimension to it. Um, in political science or in social sciences, we make a distinction between is and ought. This is and ought distinction is very, very famously introduced by David Hume, where there are certain is questions. What is the color of the sky? What is the temperature today? What is the size of the moon? These questions are what we call is questions. And generally the answer is a descriptive answer, where we say the size of the moon is so and so miles, or so and so is, or the color of the sky is so and so color, and so on. But normative questions are a totally different kind. We deal with this what has been called ought questions. What ought to be the ideal body temperature? So when we are and therefore and within this ideals, oughts, there are what I call moral ideals, and then there are non-moral ideals. For example, for a doctor, he knows, for example, if you ever get a lab report of your blood or something, one is the actual numbers you have, the exact numbers of your hemoglobin or something. On the right side of it, generally there is the ought. What is the range in which an ideal range it should be? So these mostly are the non-moral ought, where human beings know what is an ideal computer, what is an ideal car, what ought to be a good car, what ought to be a good battery, what ought to be a good. So these are all oughts that we talk about. But then there is also what I call a moral ought. Moral ought, again, as is a normative ideal, but this is much more, the root word is coming from mores. Mores are practices that come from society. The word morality comes from mores. And and also there's a link between normal and normativity. When we say something is normal, that means it is something that is fitting the norm. When we say this is abnormal or not normal, we are also saying it is not fitting the norm. So therefore, for example, if someone's sexuality is not fitting the norm, then we call them their sexuality abnormal or perverts or so and so. So therefore, when we say, even when we use most of the time when we use the word it's normal like this, but we are saying that the society has accepted it. And when society has accepted it, it becomes a normal. When society has so there is a moral ought and the non-moral ought, and they're all normative. And within that normativity, there is this normativity. Moral questions are generally are other regarding whenever there's a moral question involved, it generally involves human beings and other living beings. And then whenever a particular action has a bearing on other people's lives or impact, then we call that particular action moral action. When there are certain actions which are amoral, but yet they could be norms, in the sense of ideal good temperature. You having good fever, good body temperature might not make a difference in other people's life directly. So therefore, but it's still an ideal. So why I talked about it, all this, I just clarified this because within reason also there is a way we can judge what is a good argument from what is a bad argument, what is good thinking from what is a bad thinking. This method of trying to identify good thinking from bad thinking, and since Aristotle onwards, and probably in the Buddhist tradition and all other traditions, this method to identify correct way of identifying good thinking, correct thinking from incorrect thinking, because we all know that humans uh, have a human beings don't think always rationally. We are motivated by passions and emotions and so on. So reason is supposed to be a kind of a kind of a corrective mechanism to which we correct our thinking. So and then a lot of techniques have been developed. One of the arms of reason, we can call it, is logic. So people have developed various techniques in which logical arguments can be verified whether they are correct or wrong. If the logical if the structure of the argument is logical, then we call those arguments valid. If the structure of the arguments are wrong, or some wrong conclusions have been called, we call them invalid. And then there is a different distinction between valid arguments and sound arguments. So valid arguments are those which are logically correct, but the truthfulness of that argument is not in sound. So normally when we are looking at in an academia or in any debate, because this is part of the dialogue debate we are going to come to, so I'm just saving my energy there by talking about it here, is that when you are having a dialogue, we are asking reasons to others why you're saying what you're saying, why you're asserting what you're saying. So generally reason, when you are talking with reason or with the help of reason, you're giving arguments and you're giving reasons why you have these arguments. So you in a sense you are bound to explain why you're saying what you're saying. So and broadly, this capacity, the human faculty to figure out correct thinking from incorrect thinking, or to rectify our thinking, this has been broadly called under reason, rationality. And therefore modernity, for example, in modernity, the philosophers that we have, from Kant to Locke to Hobbes, are applying rationality, and therefore they're all called people of enlightenment, because they're using reason to rectify what they have perceived as superstition or irrational, or what called uncalled for, or what has been called pathological way of thinking that societies were there. And therefore they characterized their earlier times as dark ages, because most of you know that the church was as this is I'm talking of from the point of view of enlightenment thinkers. Now I'm not talking it from the point of a postmodernist, but from generally what are being called enlightenment thinkers. They characterized the time before them as dark ages, and they thought that particularly religion was very, very dominant, and religious thinking was deeply irrational to the core. You must have heard about the story of witch hunting, and a lot of women were sacrificed, and a lot of people were threatened to accept the church and accept religious dogma. If you don't accept the religious dogma, you would be simply punished by death, or boycotted, or what to call excommunicated from this. So there's a wave which goes on in Europe, and this is called generally broadly called enlightenment, and there are many further branches to it. What has been called the German Enlightenment, there is something called the Scottish Enlightenment, there is something called the Florentine Enlightenment, and there are different kinds of enlightenment. And again, this again is not one single monolith. And one of the great philosophers that is generally credited to for this rationality is a philosopher named Edward Baruch Spinoza. And Spinoza was a very famous rationalist and philosopher and a pantheist who comes from Amsterdam, who wrote his famous book Ethics. And this has influenced a lot of later philosophers, particularly Hegel, Marx, and all these philosophers have their deep down their inspiration in the work of Spinoza. And later on, Goethe, Fichte, and all these German philosophers and European philosophers are getting that. But one thing before I talk more about it is that there's generally a confusion about enlightenment. Is that generally enlightenment is for reason and therefore it is against God, or they are all generally atheists. Most of these philosophers were not atheists, they were generally believers of God. And generally, they also were believers in religion in a lot of dimensions. But then they were also opposed to certain excesses of religious power, where religion becomes too powerful to control every dimension of human life. And therefore, enlightenment is not synonymous with atheism, as some people might look at it. In fact, most of the Enlightenment philosophers in German, there's a word for these Enlightenment philosophers. They have a specific word called Aufklärung, because the German word for enlightenment is Aufklärung, which means clearing of something. The way they look at truth is something is suddenly in a forest, something suddenly clears up. So, and they have a specific word for this men of enlightenment called Aufklärung. And so most of these men of enlightenment were not against God or belief in God or Almighty, but they also were emphasizing on the power of human reason and human reason to rectify a lot of issues that the society that the pathologies of society that at least the Europe at that time was going through. So with this is linked to another idea, which is also which also comes along with, there is other traditions to it, but by and large, there is also this thing that is also associated with enlightenment is humanism. Humanism is again a broad movement where we believe, where the argument or the belief was that human beings can, through with the help of rationality and effort, a sincere effort, can come to solve their problems. You just need to go always to God and pray to God to solve the human problems. Human beings have the power. God has endowed man with rationality and reason, and this can be employed to solve the problems that man faces on the earth instead of just praying to God. So therefore, humanist movements, in fact, Marxist tradition is also part of this humanist tradition which sees that humanity can, and therefore humanism and science, for example, science is also one of the manifestations of reason, where we know that the work of Galileo, Copernicus, and all these works are trying to rectify the earlier classical view of the world. There was something called the view that the earth was center of the universe and everything was going around. And then suddenly all this science was showing that earth was not the center of the universe. Actually, we are going around the sun. So the earth gets decentered with modernity. Earth is no more the center of, people come to realize they are not. And then, so therefore, science, one of the branches of the emphasis of reason, and there was also one branch called rational theology, which the work of Descartes, with the work of Spinoza, work of a lot of philosophers who are trying to prove the existence of God through the help of rationality and reason. Of course, it was not a very successful enterprise, but they developed a lot of methods and technique. One very famous philosopher is Leibniz. Gottlieb Leibniz is again part of what has been called rational theology. So second feature is, the first feature is the emphasis on rationality, if you look at the work of Hobbes, if you look at the work of Locke, if you look at the works of why should you have freedom of expression, why should you have freedom, why should you have right to life, they were all employing reason and God as synonymous. So the question they would ask that God cannot be rational, because God, by definition, should be, or can only be an embodiment of rationality. God can be irrational, or to put it in another way, God also cannot be immoral. So therefore, there is a criteria through which God has given us, and therefore there is something called natural law, which is coming, natural law, natural rights, and reason. All these things can help us, though there is a revelation, but that revelation also has to be understood and interpreted with the help of the other endowed faculty that God has given, that is reason. And I think there in the Islamic tradition, there is the concept of Tawheed, and other traditions which also emphasize on the application of reason to this. So the main feature is the emphasis on reason, and this propelled the process of what has been called secularization. This is another concept that I'm introducing. Secularization, again, should not be confused with secularism, because again the word seculum comes of that is bounded by time. That which is in time is called seculum, and in the church divided its activities between sacred and secular. That activities that it did to do dedicated to God, because God is supposed to be beyond time. So God was sacred, and all the rest of human beings were within time, and therefore the word seculum comes. And then the process where the most of the functions of the government, most of the functions of the society were moving away from church to non-religious actors, this process has been called secularization. And particularly in Europe and now in most of the world, what were traditionally the religious functions, functions of the church were now done by the state. And then there was also a tension between church and the state, which is also called the Galician theory of the state, where most of you know that there were in Europe prince bishops. They were both a bishop and also a prince at the same time in some parts of Europe. And then the Pope was controlling the most of the Catholic there, and Protestantism also was another movement that again is part of the modernist movement, where Protestantism again is questioning the authority of the church and the power of the church, and therefore it played an important role along with Enlightenment philosophy. So both Protestantism and Enlightenment philosophy together give a big hit to the dominance of Catholic religious mode of thinking, a dominant religious mode of thinking. And so therefore most of the institutions that today we see as non-religious were once actually religious, including marriages. Churches were involved in marriages. Your certificates, everything was given by the church in Europe at one point. Today, the functions that the church did is now done by modern state, and therefore the modern state is so in most areas of life, the secularization is something that happens with modernity. And then another feature that also comes with modernity is the recognition of the individual as an ontological entity and also a moral entity. I make a distinction between the individual as an ontological entity and a moral entity. So that means in classical societies, the individual did not have a separate ontological status. Societies, groups had their status. They talked of Jews, Christians, this way, but individuals did not matter so much. Individuals only mattered as part of the group, but they were not seriously there. So one is individuals are now getting recognized as separate units, or which is also called atomism, something by its critics. But more important than this ontological understanding that human beings are separate units, not always clubbed as members of a group, there is also this moral demand that individuals should be recognized as as uh, recognized as independent from the group, and therefore therefore a new value of respecting the individual in relation to the group begins to appear. So therefore, a new idea of the self started emerging, and in which the self is now has the right to interpret itself and to choose the way it wants to live. This is thing that you can get in the writings of J.S. Mill and all other philosophers at the time, that that the modern self is emerging, where the self wants to not to be limited by both tradition, or within the tradition is religion, and also it wants to freely choose the kind of life it wants to live. So most of us moderns, we are all part of moderns, believe that we have the right to choose what we want, what to right to choose what kind of life one wants to live. And so therefore you might call yourself an anti-modernist, or you might want to call yourself a religious person, you want to call yourself allow tradition, but you would want to retain the freedom to choose the kind of life you want to live, which is deeply a modernist way of looking at things. Even some people say that I want to wear my hijab, I want to dress the way I want to dress up. If you want to wear a skirt, I want to wear my religious dress. If you want to wear something, so I should have the freedom to dress up the way I want. Is deeply a modern idea, because you as an individual can choose to be to wear whatever you want to wear. But this was not the case in classical period. The group or the tradition you belong, the caste you belong, that determined what you wear. You couldn't choose to wear whatever you want. So today, whom you want to marry, your sexuality, all these things, this has come with a kind of a revolution in the way in which we look at human beings. And then this revolution has come because one of the complaints against traditional, that is the dark ages, was individuality was suppressed, individuality was repressed, and individual opinion was also not allowed to dare. And therefore humanity emphasizes on the emphasis on individuality and therefore there is a moral obligation on the part of society to respect the individual and individual's freedom. And within that, today when we talk about individual people's religious choices, that is coming from modernity rather than from a traditional idea of this thing. So we are all deeply modern, though we might be critics of modern, but we are unconsciously modern because we take this freedom to express our views and critique other views or so and so as taken for granted. Even the dress to wear, a traditional dress, is already a modern idea because it's my choice kind of thing. So therefore, the moral worth of the individual, particularly the writings of J.S. Mill, Thomas Paine, particularly J.S. Mill talks about it, why the individual has to be respected. Of course, the credit also should go to his wife, Harriet Taylor Mill, whom he married after a long time in the Victorian period. You know that he lived with her and he was looked down upon. So most of the opinions that you get from J.S. Mill in his subjugation of women is also actually Harriet Taylor Mill speaking through J.S. Mill. So these were also there. So therefore, individualism is one of the main important features of modernity. And now one of the things that is not generally emphasized, but also very, very important, is that modernity, apart from with rationality, also emphasizes the value of equality. That means all irrational categorizations of human beings, all hierarchies that are not rationally or justified, they should be done away with. So therefore, hierarchies of feudal orders, hierarchies of caste, hierarchies of gender, and all kinds of hierarchies that are not rationally justifiable or rationally defendable, they should be done away with. So therefore, one of the other movements that couples with modernity, and that's where you have a lot of these Indian subaltern thinkers like Jyotirao Phule, Ambedkar embracing modernity, because it also is movement or a philosophical movement that challenges traditional scriptural-based or scriptural-based rationalizations of hierarchy. Um, and within this, equality is a very, very important value that modernity has pushed it, though there are a lot of problems with it, but generally that is there. And therefore, urbanization is also comes along with secularization, and the the humanism that that is associated with modernity also promotes technology. Technology is also one of the means through which human beings uh, can help themselves. For in the field of medicine, we can improve our health. We don't need to always pray to God to heal us. If a lot of technology is able to help us to overcome the limitations that we are by nature. In fact, this very class that is going on has overcome the limitations of space. For example, if we had to, if there was no technology called internet, we would all be forced to meet in one room somewhere and talk about this issue. It has its benefits, but it also has its disadvantages. We all have to spend huge amounts of money traveling to one place. The organizers have to create a space, and at least I can say in one place, people still, at least 2 3 people are using fan. So you might call yourself a naturalist, or you might call yourself anti-modernist. You might criticize it, but the benefits of technology has gone to everyone, whether you believe in modernity or not. So broadly, this is the way I look at modernity: rationality, humanism, individuality, secularization, and egalitarianism. These are all the broad sub movements with which that enlightenment inaugurates it, and this is something, and we are all both the products of. I'm getting confirmed your speaking language is English. Okay. If there is anyone who is not comfortable with English, if you want me to say I only know Hindi maximum, if there is something I can say in Hindi, I can help you there. But since most of here, I can sense some of are from outside India. I'm sure they don't know Hindi, or don't want to assume that they don't know Hindi or they know Hindi. So I'll stick to English, I believe. Okay. So this is modernity, and then you can read the works of Max Weber, and one of the most important essays is the essay by Immanuel Kant, What is Enlightenment? And his very famous line is, enlightenment is man's movement away from his self-incurred immaturity. That means this immaturity is incurred upon oneself rather than by someone. So we don't need to go to a guruji or a text to tell us how to live life. Man, with the help of his rationality, can use his own rationality to live a better life than this. And one of the reasons why we choose to be immature compared to be mature, Kant says, is because what he calls superiority. That means dare to think. We are scared to think, because when we think and act, then the responsibility falls on us. But when we ask a guruji or some spiritual person to tell us how to live life, you can blame the other god or someone else to do this. So therefore, with the coming of individuality, which is also linked to liberalism, is that individuals are responsible for the life they live. You can't anywhere blame this transcendental god or some transcendental being called god or so and so. Okay, so this is broadly modernity. Coming to what has been broadly again called postmodernity. Postmodernity is generally attacks whatever generally emerging from enlightenment and these values. Sometimes they are the very, very intelligent philosophers, and very, very charming, and very, very they also believe in the power of language and all of things. So they employ language very, very strategically to attack the philosophy of enlightenment and therefore modernity. Um, of course, critique of modernity, we can start with someone like Nietzsche, for example. You must have come across the name Friedrich Nietzsche. Is a very famous German philosopher, and he's generally we can call the godfather or the modern version for postmodernists. And most of the later postmodernists are getting influenced by his thought. Um, 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 Briefly put, there are many ways to look at Nietzsche's thinking. Again, that's a huge subject. I don't want to get into that. There is a Marxist critique of Nietzsche also. I'll just say one of the things that Nietzsche is also having a problem with is the movement of equality that is coming within Europe, and therefore Marxists are saying that Nietzsche becomes what has been called propagates what has been called an aristocratic ideal, where he's questioning these assumptions of modernity. First of all, is one sub branch of one other features of modernity, big philosopher of modernity is Hegel, where he talks about progressive view of history, where this is also called historicism, where as we progress, as we move ahead in time, we are progressing in humanity. Humanity is evolving. Humanity is becoming better and better until it keeps on evolving, until it has no more of improvement. It's no more improving, or to put in a more way it is no more alienated from itself. When it is completed its alienation, it is no more. It is at home with itself. Until then, history goes on. This is an Hegelian idea, and so the thing is, if you are later in time, you are somewhere advanced than to earlier civilizations. This is something that Nietzsche is not comfortable with. And so therefore he thinks that people who come later in time are not necessarily advanced than the earlier period. And therefore he questions this whole narrative of historical progress or historicity and so and so. And then therefore the term that has been, the term when history has completed its objective, the term is called the end of history, very famously used by Francis Fukuyama. He takes this idea from Hegel and says that now, since liberalism, since US and USSR has collapsed, therefore only one ideology called liberalism and capitalism has succeeded. Therefore, ideological battles have ended, and therefore his argument is this: the end of history. So, there are broadly two critiques of modernity. One is coming from, and there are many critiques. Broadly, one is Marxist critique of enlightenment, which comes from the Frankfurt School thinkers like Adorno and Horkheimer. In which they wrote a book called The Dialectic of Enlightenment. In that, they say that the Enlightenment reason is manipulative, and it's supposed to liberate it, but it's not liberated mankind as it promised. So therefore, it betrays the the promise that it gives. So Enlightenment is supposed to help us to come out of or solve our problems, and science is supposed to have helped us do. But look at the world in which we are in. It is completely dominated by capitalism, economic exploitation, environmental exploitation, and completely the world in which we are in. We are in a very unhappy world to which they are. So therefore, this is broadly in the dialectic of enlightenment. Adorno and Horkheimer begin their attack on the ideology of enlightenment, or this thing, and then later on, the other famous route of critique of enlightenment through Nietzschean route is the philosopher Martin Heidegger, where he, through his writings, critiques all this philosophy of modernity, and both at a philosophical level and also at the cultural level. And he wrote a very famous piece called The Question Concerning Technology. And he blames this whole philosophy of modernity for this exploitative nature of modern day man. To briefly put it as simply at the cost of what do you call sophistication or nuance, is that every period of time has its own particular assumptions, particular givens, or what we call the unthought in thought, the thought that has not been thought through, the unreflective part of our thought, the givens that we take it as given, and these kinds of parts play a very important role in our life. So therefore, in modernity, a lot of things is pre-reflective in our ways of thinking. And therefore, one of the things, the way he characterizes modernity, is that for moderns, including religious people or anti-modernists, whatever label they want to call, deep down unconsciously, for moderns, everything is a resource. Everything is something that is meant to be used. Everything that is to be something that has to be exploited, including religion, including the self. Therefore, including the way we relate to ourselves is exploitative. For example, if you got a certain marks, let us say you got 50%, or you ask yourself why I got 50, I could have done 60. And if you get 60, you would say I could have done even better. I will say I could have got 70. So the relationship within others and ourselves and with everywhere, every time the question what in the Hindi way iska fayda kya hai. So therefore utilitarianism, the philosophy of utilitarianism, is poster boy for modernity, because it asks the question, the use value of everything, which earlier civilizations, pre-modern civilizations, looked at it, the Greek civilizations or the Christian civilization. For example, if they in the Christian civilization, if they saw something beautiful or something wonderful or something wow, they would have said, wow, God is great. It proves that God existed. So they did not say, what is the use value of that? If they see a mountain, they're not saying, oh, how many minerals does it have? How much material does it have? They're saying, wow, it is good. So we moderns, including people who claim to be religious, they also deeply are using technologies. You must have seen religious people using a lot of gadgets nowadays, technologies and all these things. They might be critiquing science, but they'll be using science at every level, wherever possible, to promote religion. I don't know whether you know the guy called Zakir Naik, for example. Whenever he critiques other religions, he generally says they are irrational, unscientific. So therefore, the label of science becomes very, very important for moderns, and therefore everyone wants to prove they are scientific. So this is where the critique of modernity has come, where this philosophy of enlightenment, it promised us a liberation from traditional, superstitious, irrational social structures, but it created its own forms of exploitation, and it also legitimizes certain forms of exploitation in the name of reason. Therefore, postmodernists generally critique the emphasis of reason and rationality in one. Um, um, so this is the one main critique of rationality, and then question is, and then the other critique that has come, which again was uh, argued by the Enlightenment philosophers, was that the reason would help us solve our problems. As I talked about it, reason, if you did good thinking and good application of reason and rationality, we could separate truth from power, truth from false, and therefore truth from power. So one of the fantasies or one of the dreams of enlightenment is that there is correct way of thinking and then there is incorrect way of thinking, but generally incorrect way of thinking comes from selfish ways of thinking, and therefore powerful people can propagate what they deem as truth, and the weak people are forced to accept that as truth. Therefore, but enlightenment philosophy said that there is a methods through which, through the help of universality and universalization, through finding these universal truths, we can come to know the truth from the false, and thereby truth and power are two separate things. We can fight power through truth. I hope I'm making sense. This is something that gets seriously questioned by philosophers like uh, Michel Foucault, Derrida, and other philosophers, where they're saying this dream of separating reason, that is, reason will take us to truth, and thereby we can limit abuses of power and all these things with the help of reason. That has not failed. In fact, Foucault's whole work, in fact, particularly in the archaeology of knowledge and all his works, is to show you that what is deemed truth is also a product, is a manifestation of power. So his whole work is to show you that what is projected as truth, what is considered as truth, is produced by discursive apparatuses or discourses that project as truth. So truth has nothing to do with something universal. What the dominant group generally asserts as truth is generally the truth. And most of the time, this is what the Marxists have been saying, that what the powerful classes, the elite classes talk about as truth, that is generally deemed as truth. But then Foucault takes it to a particular direction in saying that at particular time, in one period of time, some people, without any serious reflection, they start accepting what he calls the conditions of truth. Once these conditions of truth is met, and then they consider it gets the status of truth, but that conditions themselves might be arbitrary and not themselves reflectively verified or done like that. Another version of this comes from in Structures of Scientific Revolution by the famous philosopher called Thomas Kuhn, right? Thomas Kuhn, for example, also talks about how science does not, again, as he critiques Karl Popper for, it doesn't, theory of falsification doesn't falsify theories. It what he calls paradigm shifts. At one point, one paradigm is accepted as science, and suddenly they give up that paradigm and then they move to another paradigm. So therefore, he critiques this scientific progression and things like that. So therefore, broadly speaking, the the dominance of reason and rationality that Enlightenment promoted, now that starts getting attacked by postmodernists, and they're saying that what is deemed reason, what is deemed rational, all these things are deep down either colonized by the Westerners or Europeans, or some group has dominated the idea of rationality, and then they can tell you whether you are rational or irrational. Therefore, colonizers used the rationality to tell the colonized that we are taking you towards from irrationality towards rationality. The West could tell so and so. Therefore, rationality was used as a means of suppressing people rather than liberating people, which Enlightenment promised. The ideal of equality again promotes is linked to the language of rights again. So again, in traditional conception of rights and modern traditional conception of rights assumes that human beings are unequal. So when you're asking for your right, you're generally requesting the person in power to give you. Modern notion of rights is egalitarian. So when you say I owe this, you're not asking for a favor. You're generally asking for what belongs to you. So the modern notion of rights is linked to Enlightenment. So generally there has been a critique of rights by McIntyre, Sandel, and one of the biggest critiques of rights in India is Gandhi. For example, when Gandhi is invoking the language of rights, he's also critique of modernity, exactly for this particular reason, because when women are asserting equality, he talks in Hind Swaraj, when women are asserting equality, they're asking for their rights, and that produces tensions that breaks down the family. So therefore, he believed that women had much good time in pre-modern times. He writes that women used to live like queens in the houses. Now they're coming out and asking the same jobs as men. And therefore, now to look at the condition of women, they're working in factories and so and so. So therefore, asking for gender equality was actually turned out to be counterproductive for women. The same thing is said by Sir Syed bit earlier, when he visits London, again he sees all women traveling in metros and all these travel. But he says our women are much better in India than women in London. So generally Asians or Islamists, when they went to West, they saw Western civilization as Jahiliyat. When they're talking of Jahiliyat, particularly when they look at gender equality, women wearing the dresses, so that's, they call it, uncivilized or this thing. So generally, when you characterize some civilized West as uncivilized, generally it is gender norms that they find it as the problematic idea. So therefore, so all these people who are unhappy with modernity, rationality, equality, language of rights are generally have now have taken the support of postmodern philosophers. One, there is nothing called rationality. There is a concept that Charles Taylor talks about, something called bounded rationality. Bounded rationality means within, for that group, that might be rational. So, for example, the practice of sati. Can we criticize this as irrational? So, but the minute you say it's irrational, one can come easily from a postmodernist, also called post-colonial, and all these things are sisters in one way, to say that how do you know that it is irrational? It might be rational from a Western point of view, but it is rational from the people who believe in that. This is called what has been called bounded rationality, where you know that if you come from India, you know there is this concept of karma. So therefore, you know that where you are born, what you're born with, which gender you're born, is mostly decided by what I call your previous janmas, and therefore, so so based on your merit where you are born. So if you're born as a woman, you are paying a fine, you are paying a karma. You are to some extent you are prayashchit, or you're doing some pap. You must have done some pap in the past. That's why you are born as a woman in the present. This is what people like Pandit Ramabai, Tarabai Shinde, and all these philosophers are attacking. In the book Sri Purusha Tulna, is that basically if you're born as a woman, you're basically serving a sentence for the. And if you're born a Brahmin, you're getting the reward you're getting. And if you're born a low caste or something, you are. So this is what I call the traditional view of merit. And therefore, people who are unhappy with this equality, that you are saying what women and men are equal, obviously this is questioning about against our tradition, our religion, and so and so. So then they also find postmodernism very, very attractive, because how do we know that sati is wrong? Because we know that if you come from this part of the region, you know that the soul will not die. So if pushing a woman into fire, only her body will die, but her soul will not die. So therefore, who is killing her? We are not committing any crime. We are not killing her. We are only helping her to go and meet her husband in the next birth. So from that point of view, performing sati is not an irrational enterprise. It is what the white Christian West, which has told, which has what some philosophers would call done epistemic violence or epistemic injustice to us, by telling us that sati and these kind of practices or untouchability, these practices are wrong. So this is where the currency of postmodernism has come. One is the Marxist side, which is not happy with rationality siding with capitalism, and this. Another is this all these cultural theorists and culturalists who are generally saying, how do we know that these cultures are wrong necessarily? So therefore, the turn, what has been called the cultural turn from 1990s, they generally find a lot of traction through postmodern thinkers. Another famous philosopher that again is linked to postmodernism is Francois Lyotard, who also says this grand narratives. He also critiques grand narratives that modernity says about science. Science again is nothing but another narrative, like Ramayana and Mahabharata or Quran or Bible. It's nothing special than this. So today everything is a narrative. Nothing is truth or nothing is false. It's just your narrative versus other narrative. So if you believe in science, you accept that narrative. If you don't believe in science, You can accept anti-science narrative. So it's all, so postmodernity says that since there is no universality, there is no objectivity in that sense through which we can achieve something, you are free to choose your version of what you think is right. Which has now been called as pluriversality. I think I have spent enough time. Everything becomes an interpretation, and everything becomes a rhetoric interpretation, not truth, reason, and objectivity. These are not the values that postmodernity does. So this is broadly the categorization. Now coming to the question of the point is dialogue. So now I'm getting into Habermas, who still believes in the modern times a certain who is still a kind of a defender of modernity, and therefore we will talk about it, and then how is that linked to questions of dialogue? Because for those here, I think in the English dialogue, how do we know that how do we advance the dialogue? How do we know that the dialogue that we are having with the other, how do we come to some consensus? How do we come to know that what is right from what is wrong? How do we say that my argument is right or your argument is right? Or how do we differentiate which argument is right and wrong? Because once you give up universality and once you give up objectivity of something, everything becomes a kind of relative. So on what basis you say that patriarchy is wrong? On what basis you say that capitalism is wrong? Because the minute you say this is wrong, someone will say that is your criteria and your imposition of your strategy on me. So this is where someone like, so therefore, in a sense, debate, discussion, and agreement coming to all these things become threatened by the postmodern attack. I hope I have made sense. Maybe in the question and answer session, I will deal with that. So he develops what he develops. That doesn't mean he is an uncritical defender of modernity. He is also critical of modernity, but there is something that within modernity that needs to be saved, which again is universality, reason, objectivity, and these things. And therefore, he believes that he is from the same school as the Frankfurt School of Adorno and Horkheimer, and therefore he tends to though he learned a lot from the Frankfurt School, he also is a critique of this book for his Enlightenment. It points out the faults of the critique of Enlightenment, but he says that the thinkers have given up, as we say, thrown up the baby with the bathwater. There is still something that can be retrieved from what is important in modernity that cannot be given up. And therefore, he makes a distinction between what is called instrumental reason, because reason is, as we know, as many kinds. Reason is not one category. There are many kinds of reason within reason, and one of the reasons that we use is what is called strategic thinking. Strategic thinking is where that if I have a goal, all my thinking is applied to how to achieve that goal, no matter what cost. What someone like Gandhi would say, ends do not justify the means, or its opposite would, ends justify the means. And this is what generally has been called instrumental rationality. Instrumental rationality is where you have a particular goal and you want to apply reason to achieve that goal. This has been broadly called instrumental rationality, or strategic thinking is also something which can be used. Generally, it has not to do with morality. It has not to do with morality. Morality generally is a constraint. Whenever you want to act morally, you are applying a constraint on yourself. You can tell a lie, but you decide not to tell a lie. That means you're constraining yourself. So morality is a constraining of human behavior. So rationality, in that sense, is unconstrained thought in that sense. So therefore, the only thing that guides your thinking is how to achieve your end. And one of the big examples we can get it in is in war. For example, you must have come across this term called people who die by unintentional purposes. For some reason, my mind is blocked. It is called in our military language. The word is used. Casualties. No, there's a word for it when when they bomb something, some innocent people are
collateral damage.
Collateral damage. Yes, thanks for that. Yeah, that's the word I'm looking. So generally, they calculate the amount of ammunition needed, amount of attack, and then therefore other people die. So at present, we can see in Israel using this method because it wants to kill Hamas people, but civilians and children are all dying. That is, they all categorize it as collateral damage. We don't want to kill them, but they're getting died. They're sorry for it. We have no other option, so we are doing that. So most militaries use this collateral damage, right? So this is a classic example of strategic thinking, unethical thinking, or what is called instrumental way of thinking at stuff. Probably the Hamas also did the same strategic thinking by going and raping and killing innocent babies. Again, in the cause, because our cause is a good cause, for our good cause, we are doing this. Again, is ends justify the means because we are good. So this is a kind of a strategic thinking, instrumental way of thinking. And this is not just used in war. This is mostly employed by economists. This is mostly employed by policymakers. This is mostly employed by most of the people in power. For example, if particular policy is there, most policies have certain people always disadvantaged and some people advantaged. All they do is calculate how many people are getting advantaged, how many people are getting disadvantaged. Since generally the disadvantaged people are minority and generally are weaker group, sacrifice their interests for the sake of larger majority of the people. So this is also in economics and policy making. Mostly our bureaucrats are employ this what is called rationalistic thinking or what is called instrumental reason for others. Even international relations, most of the time, are experts who are dealing with international relations, which country to which we should build, support, which country to not. Again, this is all pure strategy rather than any kind of moral. They might appear moral on the surface, but deep down, if you think morally, you are stupid. So therefore, one of the things that modernity also promotes and capitalism also promotes that the one who acts morally or thinks morally is generally stupid, emotional, also therefore irrational, while the person who is entirely rational only talks about ends justify the means, that person is considered as smart, good, and so and so. This is the values. Now, this is what Adorno and Horkheimer have attacked enlightenment of. And Habermas is telling, no, that's only one version of reason. Of course, this is being promoted by modernity, but there is something called communicative rationality, or also we called communicative ethics or communicative thinking. And this is where the question of dialogue is important, because why do generally dialogues fail? Why do, most of the time when people come together to discuss and debate, most of the time they do not come to an agreement. They do not come to a, consensus, because most of the time the parties involved are strategic thinkers. They're all trying to maximize their benefit, maximize their advantage, and try to see how they can negotiate the best possible deal within that particular this. And generally, when your opponent or your opposite group understands that you're doing this for and this is also the fight between Jinnah and Nehru about what rights should minorities have, what rights should majority have. Again, it is all because Jinnah and Nehru are trained as lawyers. They're generally trained in this legal thinking. Generally, legalistic thinking generally is this what we call instrumental rationality rather than ethical or communicative rationality. So what solution that Habermas gives is that in a dialogue, when we are engaging with a dialogue, we have to apply communicative rationality rather than instrumental rationality. I would give one more example before I jump into it. Is when you when you are ever invited by a media person on TV, particularly like Arnab Goswami, you generally see that people who are opposite to his views are generally attacked, laughed at, ridiculed, and sometimes dismissed. What is happening is that what Arnab Goswami is employing is this instrumental rationality. He is not interested there to listen to you. He is inviting you to just to demolish you. He is not there to understand you, to say what you're saying. He's pretending to understand you. He's pretending to listen to you, but actually he's done all his homework and found out what are the problems in your argument. He employs a lot of clerks, young students who there and find fault in your argument. They dig about you, get information about you, and then they find out faults in you're saying, and you don't know what can be brought out from your background, and suddenly you are attacked on TV, and you are saying something, and then you have no words to express, and within that time he takes your time, and then you're dismissed. And generally, he declares to be the winner of the debate and says this professor or this person, this Maulana or this person is not able to argue. But the problem with the professor who is going to the TV to give the interview, he wants to employ communicative rationality because he's studying the problem for years and he wants to understand the problem. So he thinks his expertise can be given to communicate that to the anchor, and through that he can communicate to society. So this is where we can see two versions of strategic rationality or communicative rationality and loggerheads in most of our media channels. Even the questions that are being asked and something is always sometimes is always distorted. And this is what Habermas wants to solve, that whenever we are in a dialogue, there are certain assumptions, unpreliferative assumptions that we have to. Both parties have to assume that both are moral in nature, and therefore, in all communication or in all communication with others, because it's our concern with dialogue, there are certain understanding that there is certain agreement over what the meaning of words, certain meaning of language. Without that basic agreement, you cannot have a dialogue with anyone else, with anyone. So certain assumptions have to be made about the shared meaningness of language. So for him, he taps into language, and therefore he goes into speech acts and other philosophy. This is a 300 to 400 size book. I do not want to summarize, but all communication with others, particularly in dialogue, we trust the language that we are using as the common shared meanings that we have. And that common shared meanings that we have when we speak in a particular language can be the basis of objectivity and the criteria with which we can evaluate the arguments of your opponent, and also criticize your opponent, and also self-critically evaluate one's own argument, and so and so. So he says that the language that we share can be the basis of providing some amount of communicative rationality, to which even if you're calling someone a donkey, you're assuming that the other person understands what you mean by the donkey. So though you might hate him, that the minimum understanding is that the shared meaning of words is something to which we can use it for that. This is one. Or that means the ethics that he is propagating in a dialogue always involves that both the parties make the effort to communicate. In a sense, it's not always a one-sided business. So the one who's communicating, for example, I'm trying to say something. It's not only my job to express myself as correctly as possible. It is also understood that you're also making the effort to understand equally as much as possible, to your best effort to understand what I am trying to say. So only then we are practicing communicative ethics. If you say that only it's my job to explain, not, and your job is to only to judge what I'm saying, then somewhere down the line, the communicative ethics have failed. And therefore, he develops this ideal speech situation. In an ideal speech situation, all the parties deem the opposite person as equal, and also deem that the opposite person is worthy of communicating your ideas, and also deem that opposite person is capable of able to understand your ideas. This is something that is assumed by all speakers within a group discussion or in a dialogue. If it is two people, it is also assumed within the group. And this basic ethics is what he calls communicative ethics. And therefore, one of the ethics is trying to be truthful in your speaking. Whenever the information that you are giving, the information I am giving to your friend or anyone, you are trying to be truthful as much as possible. And next is you are also trying to be objectively more, and you also claim moral claims, and you're also trying to be sincere. That is, subjectively, you're trying at best to be sincere. Sincerity and honesty are two different things. You might be honest but be insincere. You can be sincere and be dishonest. There are philosophers have also split these two terms. For example, you say that, yes, I am corrupt. Yes, I'm a patriarch. Oh, I'm a bad guy. You might be honestly saying it, but you're not willing to change it. Then you lack the sincerity. So when you say sorry, you mean, when you say sorry, it's not simply a word you're saying. You're saying that you're willing to change. That is when you have said it with sincerity. Otherwise, you just the word sorry, it doesn't mean anything. So therefore, three criteria can be used. One is the cognitive part of it. The cognitive claim is whatever you're saying is true. The opposite person most of the time is believing what you're saying is true. Maybe what have I told in the last 1 hour might be, a lot of things might be wrong, but you are all believing and you're writing down thinking that what I'm saying is true. Right? So therefore, that trust is involved in that, and therefore I have to keep that trust involved. Second is normative rightness. Therefore, I cannot say wrong things. I have to try my best to say morally what is right and wrong in a dialogue. You can't simply say that women or lower castes or blacks should be mistreated or something like that. Normative claims, moral claims, also normative rightness. And third is sincerity. These three things: cognitive, moral, and subjective. These three parts of a dialogue have to be properly be there in an ethical what we call in a discourse ethics in that sense. So in a dialogue, we can simply say that, but there are certain criteria that Habermas suggests through which we can promote a good communicative, and the term for that is what he calls communicative competence. That means all speakers have certain communicative competence in the sense, for example, a professor will have higher level of communicative competence compared to a simple person because he's trained into talking about this subject and so and so. A doctor will have a certain communicative competence compared to a person not trained in medicine when it comes to related to health. So these are all these things. So one of the ways in which when we are practicing this dialogue, the ethics, discourse ethics, we need to first have to be clear as much as possible. Therefore, whatever you are saying should be comprehensible to others. It shouldn't be like this French philosopher, what they're saying, people are trying to figure out what they're saying. Sometimes you can't be cryptic or you can't say things which are, only you understand and you expect that. It's the job of the others to understand. This we call it in academia humorously as franchising. Franchising means the French philosopher expects you to understand him rather than he's making the effort to communicate to you. So therefore, generally the intellectuals have this problem of their articulating some, even when sometimes they come in they ask questions in such a way that the speaker is not able to understand what the question is, because they're using all kind of jargon, terminology, particularly from literature. They know this lot of ammunition from vocabulary. They pick it up and use it. Maybe sometimes this is one way. Shashi Tharoor, for my sound English might be very, very good. He might have very good vocabulary. That doesn't mean he's clear in always what he's saying. So this is one. Comprehensibility, truth, as I said, the desire to express the truth. So you have to make the effort to check before you're saying what you're saying is factually correct or not. Most of the time, people don't have the time to even verify. Someone said it to you, you say that is, you claim it as truth. And there are certain obligations when we are having a dialogue as I said, the listener is supposed to be making the effort to understand what the speaker is saying, and the speaker also has to make the sincere effort to communicate at best what he or she is saying. So this is what is called the normativeness of those, and generally the beliefs and all these things, by and large, the criteria of truthfulness is there. So therefore, Habermas, taking his basic ideas from Enlightenment, saves communicative rationality. Wrong in the modern world is too much emphasis on instrumental rationality, and we need to save. The only way to, and so therefore dialogue is always done with the aim of it has many aims. One is to come to a higher level of truth. For example, you have an opinion, your friend has an opinion. Let us say you have an opinion about a particular movie, whether the movie is good or bad. So first you express your views about that movie. Your friend expresses your opinion about that movie. Both of you have a dialogue, and later on, both of you, from looking at in 2 points of view, you can come to a better understanding whether the movie was a good movie or not. So in most of our discussions through dialogues, Habermas believes that through our proper ethical dialogues, we can solve most of the problems of the world internationally, politically, socially, and all this, if the dialogue is not strategic but communicative in nature. So this is where I will end with Habermas. And last 2 minutes, I will also, this is questioned by the postmodernist called Francois Lyotard. He basically says that most of the dialogues, most of the language, what he uses the term from help from Wittgenstein, is called language games. Language games is languages are deeply infested with power. When you use the word, you're unconsciously getting trapped into particular ideology. I just give an example. I myself didn't realize it. You must have heard the debate about marital rape. Should we make a law related to marital rape? Should we not? There's a debate. Kya kare to kare kya? What to do? There are people taking sides. I'm sure you must be knowing this debate, right? What to do? Because it is marriage, there is some conjugal rights to both the parties. What to do? But have you ever thought of that? Have you come across this term, marital murder? Why, if there's no word for marital murder, why there's a term for marital rape? Why rape within the marriage gets a special meaning? Are you getting? A rape is a rape, whether it is within the marriage or outside the marriage. It is equally morally problematic, right? The minute you say it's marital rape, it seems to be of a different category of rape. So that language has trapped us into the idea that it is somehow not as bad as, it's more tricky, more complex. But every rape is complex. Every rape evidence, everything is complex. But the very term called marital rape fixes you in the way of thinking about, the term fixes our way of thinking about that we have to think specially about marital rape compared to gang rape and other things. But morally, it is actually the same as other things. That's where I'm saying that this is what postmodernists are saying, that the language that we are using, the concept of merit, the concept of equality, the lot of words that we use, for example, the words that is used, enjoying reservations. So when you use the word enjoying reservations, you always have put that those people who are benefiting from reservations are the people who are enjoying. Those who are not getting reservations are the people who are suffering. So generally, the privileged groups are the ones who don't get affirmative action, and the disadvantaged groups are the ones who are getting affirmative action. But the language enjoying reservation makes them feel that actually the poor are enjoying and the privileged are the suffering. So this is the way in which language plays the game. And this is the word that Lyotard is telling, that European words, the terminology that is used in wars, and this, for example, when Israel.
Dr. Dara, we have around 30 minutes left. So if you
okay, I'm done. So he talks about languages fail in courts of law. He gives an example of a tribal group fighting a case in Australia about their land, and they said the language that they speak can never be translated or reflected in a modern day language. So therefore, he has a concept called different. The concept of different is certain fundamental differences that exist in languages cannot be solved through language that Habermas is saying. So you can say so the only way is to try to understand the other. No matter how much you try to understand the other, until you know the language of the other, until you are open to the language of the other, you can't be fair towards others. So you can't rely on language as the source of objectivity. This is articulated in Francois Lyotard's book, The Different, in which radical differences in language, if some classical person comes to modern time, he cannot communicate to you what in your language that he wants to communicate. Therefore, communicative rationality is not possible. This is an attack, and therefore dialogue more than consensus, dissensus is the virtue for postmodernists. I'll end with that.
Thank you, Dr. Dara. And Randall had a question. I think we just lost him. He had a question in the chat. I'm just reading it out, and maybe later he can see the recording.
Who's this? Randall, right?
Randall Sequeira, yeah.
I can see a question called, Sir, while you are exploring modernity and postmodernity as largely philosopher, even political philosophy, can you connect it with culture as lived reality of the people of the time with examples? Is that the question you are planning to read?
Yes, Doctor.
With the lived reality, or what is called is that, for example, in classical period, for example, pre-enlightenment, for example, God was a given, just like there is sun, moon, though God is not visible. In all of their discourses, in their lived reality, God was there. Or take the concept of karma. For most people in India, something goes wrong, it's their karma. If you get cancer, it is your karma. It's not bad luck. For others, it is bad luck. For Indians, if you have got a cancer, that means your karma. In your past, that's why you're getting. So everything is acting perfectly well. So you get an accident, it is your karma. It is not, sometimes it is not your karma, it is the karma of your group that is transferred to you. So this is the way in which traditionally society accepted, for example, inequality of gender, for example. Most people accepted that in the real life that men and women are not equal. Even if you tell them that men and women are equal, for a lot of people, it is not still, it doesn't go beyond a particular point in there. This is what has been called in affective studies. In affective studies, you might convince someone of gender equality, but emotionally that person still will feel that men are superior to women, including women might have this thing. This is so therefore a lot of things go to the way in which our body itself accepts these things. So today, modernity, we are all comfortable with technology. You might criticize modernity, but when it comes to something, you will use a map, Google, or anything. The rationality that we apply is unconsciously there in our lived reality. Even when you use religion, you want to promote religion, you will use For example, you know that if you're taking a medicine, you pray, put it on a Bible or put it on a Quran or something, and ask God the. So you'll not ask God, you'll ask medicine plus God to work for you. So in a sense, you want you want rationality also with God. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I remembered, Solomon, go ahead. I'll mention my thing later on. Solomon, please go ahead.
Who?
In this whole analysis of modernism and the postmodernism, the postmodernism, while critiquing the modernism, it does give certain amount of lead. How come the postmodernism has not used the concept of power to have a more and more clarity? How the modernism actually began to dominate the whole socio-economic environment and the situation? Why the postmodernism has not really understood the power, the whole concept of power, and how the power actually influences the modernism. For example, the Weberian term of rationality, still it is being used by the capitalistic, very highly individualistic capitalistic understanding of the whole transactions and relationships even. So they even justify that. That is one. And the second, I would like to ask you, while definitely all these philosophers, all these economists, or those who have really critiqued the modernism, the postmodernists are those who are relatively, they are relatively young ones. After the whole understanding of, say, globalization, how the globalization has affected. From the third world countries, people who actually resisted the globalization and its effects, did it touch upon? Did they say anything new? Did they bring their own concerns, their own sensitivities to the whole understanding of the postmodernism? For example, from the indigenous people's wisdom, or people who really resisted the globalizations. With regard to the whole world social forums, you have two separate. Did they bring anything onto the postmodernism to have a little more clarity? That means the Western understanding, all the philosophers are there, including Habermas. But what happens to those people who are coming from Africa, Central America, South America, or in India, especially in India, and those who have resisted the globalization? How we can understand all this? I don't know whether you have thought about whether any readings or anything will be there. Very interesting to touch upon.
As I said, this is a very huge topic. So, my focus was on trying to tell the basics of it. I think postmodernists have sensitized us to the link between knowledge production and power. So if there is anyone if there is any group that has linked knowledge production with power, it is the work of Foucault and postmodernists. Postmodernists are saying that one cannot see knowledge as beyond power. Power generates knowledge, and in turn, knowledge gives power to some people in that sense. So therefore, I think postmodernists mostly are concerned with power, and therefore Enlightenment claims to be saving us power from power. Actually, it is there, but it is much more insidious in forms of rationality. Therefore, postmodernists have showed us that the link between modernity and power. The young ones, if I'm remembering your question, the young ones or the indigenous systems and so. Yes, there have been what has been called post-colonial critique and so. In that particularly, a lot of critique has come from critique against modernity has come from South Africa, from Latin America, and to some extent from Indian side. But indigenous groups, except few, have taken their attack against postmodern. Generally, they attack the mainstream Indian media from the Indian side, mainstream Indian academics. But generally, there are indigenous groups. Take, for example, Walter Mignolo and these people, and these kind of philosophers generally go to indigenous group and start pitching indigenous groups versus so-called European modernity. But that again is generally the problem is with this middleman between the indigenous group and the so-called Europeans. Generally, these are generally European descendant people who tend to speak for the indigenous group. External voices for indigenous groups are rarely come on in academia, in academic. Sometimes their voices are rationalized through some theory, or sometimes postmodernism, sometimes this. But I don't think there has been again the critique. So what is critique of modernity again? When an indigenous person is critiquing modernity, what exactly is he critiquing? Or he or she is critiquing? Is he critiquing rationality? Is he critiquing modernity? Or is he critiquing equality? Is he critiquing the language of rights? Or is he critiquing the exploitative nature of modern science? Most of the time, it is critiquing the exploitative nature of modern science and the application of rationality, to which already modernists like Habermas is coming out with what he gives an alternative to instrumental rationality, what he called communicative rationality. So yeah, so in third world countries, generally we are still colonized subjects in a lot of ways. You must have come across this term coloniality, where whenever we have to speak, we need to still speak in the language that the theories that are articulated, mostly developed or articulated, are acknowledged by the West. So in that sense, we are still stuck up with coloniality. Even whenever I am criticizing or anyone is criticizing, we still are forced to use their categories. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Dara. Dr. Purvi, you can ask your question, and then Dr. Denny can ask. Thank you.
Thank you, Pragati. Thank you, Dr. Dara, for an amazing session. So I want to comment on the text and the content. I just want to say that modernism and postmodernism emerged primarily in retaliation to Dark Ages, I'd like to say. But also they are very subjective, periodic, contextual, convenient, and depend upon the dominant dialogue that's happening in that era, right? So what happens is it makes, and also very confusing, especially for scholars like me who believe that they are modernist because of the virtues or the morals that we just discussed, but also because I believe in Foucault's work. My thesis is on biopolitics. And everything that you said, I could relate to, that knowledge is power. And that is why knowledge is in certain hands, because the powerful doesn't want everybody to get powerful. And that is why, we have this very tiered hierarchical education system as well. So where should we place ourselves? Like, we are progressive youngsters, somebody who's doing a research on women's agencies, reproductive autonomy, vis-a-vis biopolitics, but also very rooted in the ideas of egalitarianism, equity, equality, and everything that modernism talks about.
So if I have understood you correctly in this, what you said, and I have to give a very quick answer, what I'm saying is be careful with postmodernists. They appear to be very liberating for you in the beginning, because they give you the ammunition, the language to speak about a lot. But then deeply hidden, they are very good at, as I said, they're very good at camouflaging their arguments through this way. And particularly, we all are experiencing a kind of unhappiness with our times. So when we glorify some period, as before enlightenment was not so dark, it was nice, and it was not as dark as the enlightenment people said, because witchcraft was not bad, or sati system was not as bad as people tell you. Of course, since you have not experienced sati, or you have no chance of someone pushing you into fire, so for you it looks, you can romanticize the past as it's maybe the Britishers has told us as it, that it is bad, but maybe sati is not as bad as,
But it's still.
Sorry, your voice is.
Sorry.
Something happened.
Sorry, yeah. So, but there is still bodily harm. There is, let's say.
No, but what I'm trying to say is that generally, I think if Lata Mani, I think the book is, she critiques the critique of sati. She uses postmodernism to say that it is the Britishers who told us that sati system was bad. We all got trapped by it. It may be bad, but it's not as bad as. So we have been colonized. So postmodernists have used. Take for example the caste system. Hamara caste system was not so bad and horrible, and it was nice. It was bad, but it's not as bad as the Britishers have said it. So the way we understand caste is a colonial construct. So this is all used to actually to say that everything was not so bad. Before the Britishers, things were fine. It was the Britishers who made you feel unhappy with your past. So therefore, gender inequality. What's so wrong with gender inequality? So someone will argue that no, it's you have not missed it. It was a wonderful time. Women had great time in the past. So a lot of people have not experienced that. Particularly younger generations who have experienced certain freedom, they don't value the freedom to which we have. So postmodernism taps onto your existing freedom, and it's like the Soviets gave up their basic breads and everything because they wanted to be like US, because they wanted to have a shopping mall and have all the choices. Like they said, Western life was so wonderful, so they thought their life, and now they don't have minimum bread. A lot of poor people are suffering in Russia. So therefore, once you have something, you don't value it. So postmodern 10th is that you can come out of this by going back to, pre-modern times. Yes, knowledge and power are linked, which is already said by Marxists before. But then, possible for Foucault.
Sorry, it got stuck. I couldn't
There is
hear.
no emancipation possible. That means you knowledge. You're always within it. So it's very profound, it gives us a lot of things, but at the same time you end up being helpless because you can't do anything. Even what's emancipation? That's also another word given by someone.
Construct. It's
also exactly. A construct. So therefore there is no escape. That's where it produces that. Therefore, Marxists have come back.
Sorry, it's getting stuck again. The video.
Lucerdo, this very famous Marxist who comes out how the Nietzscheans, in order to get back into academia, they can't talk about aristocratic values, meritocratic values, inequality. So they come with a different angle into the system.
Thank you.
Yeah. So be careful with that's short way. You can have I'll send you some material if you want on.
Please do.
Dr. Dara, Solomon has also asked for the book on Habermas that you were on postmodernity that you were referring to. So
one of the things is that there is no one single book. I can give you one introductory book to Habermas and one introductory to Lyotard and Modernity. So at least it will be 4 books. You can't have one single book. That's why when I have to give material, it's not like
right.
I can mail to you 4 books, basic introductory books if you want, or if you want, I'll give you the main books also. Basic books on Habermas, Lyotard, Modernity, and Postmodernity. Okay. If I get an article, I'll send it to you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay.
And Dr. Denny, you can ask, and then Dr. Ranveer, you can ask next. Thank you.
Hi, Dr. Dara. It's a wonderful thing. Initially, I was thinking it would be a very boring lecture, but indeed it was not. I was thinking about this thing that just bringing back the whole conversation back to the dialogue.
Yeah.
Now, see, whenever we are looking for any kind of dialogue, so the basic premise is that there is some kind of conflict. That's why that dialogue is needed. Now, in any kind of conflict, particularly in the modern world where this manufactured consent is just playing a very significant role.
I will add there is something called manufactured dissent also. Don't think dissent is natural. Manufactured dissent is also there. Yeah.
Now, in this context, expecting somebody with this very utopian idea of this to have this communicative rationality where somebody coming with a lot of ethics in the whole discourse. So this is something I assume it is a very it's an idea which is not true to the field, basically, that somebody in any kind of conflicting situation coming with full honesty, with open heart, with lot of goodness, with openness. So if that could have been the case, then I think the need of dialogue will not arise at the very first place. So how you see this thing in context to this whole discussion?
First of all, there are some things are true. There are certain assumptions in your question. First of all, if we believe that we are all pure-hearted and clean mind, the conflicts will not emerge. Conflicts will still emerge if you're all pure-hearted and so conflicts are not always emerging because of some corruption, moral corruption within us. Sometimes there is genuine moral concerns. That's why conflict happens. So this can sometimes be victim blaming. Oh, you are fighting with me because you are आपका दिल अच्छा नहीं है, यार intention अच्छा नहीं है. So that is one. Second question is the second part, which is the answer is much more complicated. Is that what Habermas was asked that this ideal situation doesn't exist, this ideal speech situation doesn't exist. So what we do in political theory is we call this ideal speech situation as what we call a regulative ideal. That's why I spent my time with ideal body temperature. Only when we know what is an ideal body temperature, a doctor can tell whether you're unwell or not. So if you know the temperature is 98 something, either it is above is unwell, or if it is 98, he will think, okay, body temperature theek. So therefore, this 98 is the regulative ideal. So once you develop what a regulative ideal is, it's difficult to achieve in real life, but at least we know what direction we can go. Or at least we know whether the party, both you and when you're having a dialogue with other person, at least you try to be truthful, sincere, and so, right? On one side. Then you give the chance to your opponent to be truthful, sincere, so and so. And somewhere down the line, you feel that the opposite party is not truthful, sincere, and this, or your opponent says you are not this. Both of them have to reflect and see if it's possible or not. Right?
But
then only the problem will be solved. Otherwise, you can't solve any problem.
But in this direction, if we see this.
So, what is the implication of your question? I'll just say is you want both the parties to be not moral, yet the solution should be there, which is again instrumental rationality.
Okay.
Both the parties don't need to be moral, but give me a solution where both their conflict is gone. Husband-wife relationship, both don't need to be ethical, moral, but they have to be happy together. You understand? So give me a formula where both are chalak, everything, but they live happily. So you're asking for this is what Rajiv Bhargava calls with most people think about secularism. People think secularism some kind of a magic formula that मेडिसिन दवा मेडिसिन वो डालते ही प्रॉब्लम सॉल्व हो जाता है. नो, सेक्युलरिज्म इज अ मॉरल थिंग. ऑल ऑफ them us have to practice those ethics. What ethics to be practiced, that is where the debate is. I hope I have answered your question. Without ethics, you can't solve any problem until it's a medical problem or some other problem. But when it's a conflict between human beings, either you can avoid the problem, or Hobbes will tell you both parties will, through their prudence, because all the parties for their selfish reasons come and create a contract. It is their selfish reasons that produce the contract, and that solves the problem. This is what capitalism does. It's saying that is what the critique is. Without morality, we can solve the problem. Everyone does for their own selfish reason. The market will solve the problem. You are acting selfishly, but somehow it acts for the good of the society. That's the beauty of capitalism, right? All of you act selfishly, but society will develop morally.
Just a small addition because I can see a lot of young minds are here, and I can imagine when I was in their age, so I was also struggling with a lot of these philosophies and just what different philosophers are saying. There is a wonderful podcast series. You can Google for it. I will also be sharing the link. Named as Philosophize This. So this Philosophize This is it's a wonderful series.
Even I follow it.
Pardon?
Even I follow it.
Yeah, it's a wonderful series.
Yeah.
So if people are interested to listen a lot of podcasts, so they can just follow that series.
Okay. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Ranveer, for your question. Thank you, Dr. Dara, for the answer. Dr. Denny has mentioned his question in the chat. Please enlist 3 core differences between modernists and postmodernists. Postmodernism emphasized subjectivity, rejected the idea of a single objective truth. Is this correct?
The second part of the question, that it rejected the idea of a universal truth, not objective truth, because there's a difference between universal truth and objective truth, because what is objective might be for me, might be not objective for you, might be subjective for you. So there, from Nietzsche onwards, objectivity is not questioned, but universality is questioned. Because therefore, because again, on what criteria we differentiate objective from subjective? For the person believing it, it is objective. But the person who is not believing it, or from a different point of view, that they call it subjective. So objectivity is the aim of truth, but postmodernists are not. For example, racism is objectively true, though subjectively people believing that color has effect on intelligence is subjectively wrong. So postmodernism does not entirely reject objectivity, but universality is something that it is clearly opposed to. So someone asked me 3 core difference between modernists and postmodernists. One is discrediting rationality. Second is emphasis on science critique, again, which is also part of rationality, and also believing that. And second is knowledge and truth production. Power and truth production can be separated. We can have a seeking of knowledge without seeking of power. That is questioned second by postmodernists. And third, consensus is not the ideal. Dissensus is the ideal. In a dialogue, more than consensus, because all consensus invariably suppressing someone's point of view. किसी को दबा के ही consensus बन सकता है. So dissensus is the ideal. Jacques Rancière, postmodernists are saying disagreement, dissensus should be the values of a dialogue rather than agreement, consensus. This is what Habermas and all these people were. So truth is something that is achievable and possible for enlightenment. Truth is neither achievable, neither possible, and neither desirable. There is a postmodernist who said we should give up the word truth. It has done more problems than it has solved the problem. Richard Rorty is the philosopher. He says we should give up the word truth, and Nietzsche, it comes from Nietzsche saying that falsity is more powerful than truth. A lie can make you do things than a truth. You know, this is also proved by a lot of science that David Hoffman talks about that there are creatures that have more truth. They have less chance of success than creatures that are more willing to survive. That means they will believe anything to survive. So our desire for faith and craving for faith is used for your survival. Yeah, these are the main differences.
Thank you. Dr. Denny, I hope your question. Okay, all right, thank you. So we are almost towards the end of the time. I just wanted to mention this one anecdote because you mentioned Arnab Goswami and how he calls people to the show essentially to berate them, not exactly. So I was having this conversation. I work for India-Pakistan Citizen to Citizen Peace. So I was speaking to one of my co-peace builders from Pakistan, and they so one of them questioned that I don't understand that why does he I'm speaking this in Hindi because I think that you will get the feel of it. So he said कि वो बुलाते क्यों हैं अगर उन्हें बेइज्जती करनी होती है तो, and so I mentioned, I said, and then he says that मेरे को समझ नहीं आ रहा है वो खुद क्यों जाते जब उन्हें पता है कि मेरी बेइज्जती होगी. So I said, I've heard that Arnab, the channel pays them 200 to 250 USD per appearance. And he says कि अच्छा तब तो फिर कम ही बेइज्जती करता है, इतने में तो और करनी चाहिए. So I think again, like the whole concept of contextual.
But let me add to it. When they're inviting you, they're very polite. Generally, when they're inviting you for a talk, oh, Dr. Krishna Swamy, or aap aaiye, aapke views dijiye, we are giving you a chance to give your views. That's the way they'll call you, because that team which is calling you is different.
Yes.
That is a sales team. Their aim is to get you to the studio. So they will do all kinds of techniques. They'll be super polite. If you're a man, they will send you a girl. If you are a girl, they will figure out what it is. They'll find all kinds of strategies they will use to come to this. Once you go there, so you feel we also have a weakness to come appear in front of TV. Mom, I'm coming on TV. See me at 12. So a lot of people get trapped for this, this desire to appear on TV. अब कुछ बोल देते हैं अपनी point of view. We all also desire to express ourselves, right? We think we can say something dhamal that can change everything. This is our say. So that's where they trap us into calling onto TV.
That's the difference between sales and customer service. So they say that a lot of people with the sales sold the idea of afterlife to somebody, to some people, and then they come and see that afterlife is not exactly what was there, and they're like, okay, this is the actual experience.
And so by the time you have arrived on TV, they have already done homework on you. And they have already known what to attack you, what not to attack you. So already they have done their homework. And all they have to do is they keep backup also, if not you, someone else. So yeah, so they're pretty rationalistic there. We should be aware of it because most of us don't go on to TV on a regular time. So we don't know what happens. So after you go 2 or 3 times, you will... I don't think people are only going for money there. A lot of Maulanas go there because hum aapko sahi Islam samjhayenge. They're very innocent. They can tell and call all the relatives, see, I'm coming on TV. But actually, wahan jaane ke baad, Arnab Goswami is not at all there to listen to you. He's just there to insult you. This is not just with Pakistanis. This is done with groups.
Indians as well. Yes,
Indians
yes.
also. Yeah.
Yes. Anyone who disagrees with his point of standpoint. Yeah.
So
Okay.
that's the nature of the game. Yeah.
Yes. Absolutely. I think a lot of us understand that here. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Dara. It was wonderful to have you. It was, I think there were so many take-backs that I'm going to internalize, especially the part where you compared, postmodernists and I think the idea of a reality that we have not seen and how magical it appears, including a lot of terms that just get thrown about in our vocabulary. But I think the participants got a good look at a well deep thought into all of those. So thank you so much, and I really hope that all of us, including me and everybody here, will take back. Will be able to have, whether they are postmodernists or modernists, they will be able to have a good dialogue with the other party. So thank you so much. And
after the talk on sales team and all this, I will take it. Thank you with the pinch of salt. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.